Hi, I wanted to welcome everybody to the Irvington Library. I'm Erin Murphy. I'm one of the children's librarians here. Usually we use this room for story time, so you guys get to use it for the first time since, I don't know how long. But anyway, we're really glad to be partnering with the Irvington Presbyterian Church to host this series of discussions. And one of the neat things is it's part of a more holistic, greater effort to build relationships in the community, and that's a really exciting thing for us. I wanted to let you know about a couple things that are happening at the library, so keep your eyes up. We're going to have an adult summer reading program again this year. We're going to be doing the kids summer reading program as we always do. And we've got other programs coming up. If you need your a library card, or if you need to renew it, please talk with my colleagues at the checkout desk. Come to the information desk if you have questions. You know where we are. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Oh, hello.
Thank you. Okay, well, good evening. I'm Kathy Moorhead, and I'm part of the Justice Advocacy team at Irvington Presbyterian Church. And some of our other team members are here. We have the name tags on. So Tom and Holly and Marland and myself, there's about 7 of us that are on the team. So we welcome you to our first kind of big event here, and that we're very excited about partnering with the library and working with the community and that. A couple little household items. Restrooms were when you first came in, they were, as you're going back out now, they would be on your right that way. And you're going to talk about vote. So I think that's all it is. We'll turn it over to Miss Holly.
Right, thank you. Thanks for coming out. This is a great turnout. We were very excited. We're very excited for everyone who's here. My name's Holly Pittman. I'm facilitating this book read. A little bit about myself. I've been a social worker for 20 years, and I've facilitated groups with substance use disorders, biopsychosocial groups, medical groups, and traditional clinical groups. My goal today, as far as facilitating, is that I am not teaching this book. I'm not in academia in no way. I am just a social worker, and as a facilitator, my goal is to keep the communication up, and if we get stuck on topics, to introduce new topics and move on from there. I do have a few housekeeping things I'd like to look at. They're the same for all of my groups. The first thing is that we're going to start on time. We're a little bit late today, and finish on time. I'm going to ask Marlon in the back to give me a big wave when I got 10 minutes left so that we can close stuff up for the day. Treating others with respect, no put downs. Allow every voice to be heard. A lot of times people get really excited and we move from topic to topic when other people are still wanting to give their 2 cents. And also put cell phones on vibrate or mute. So let's move on.
Put this one on you.
Yes, I got one like that too. Hey, we get together there.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, here it is.
I don't.
That's the phone.
Now,
You're not very talkative.
Yeah, normally not.
so if you do need to take a call or you need to stretch your legs or use the bathroom, just go ahead and head on out. We will begin. So the book is Nickel and Dime Not Getting By in America, and of course we're working with the Irvington Library here in Irvington Presbyterian Church. This is a community read, so we are today looking at chapter 1, the foreword and the introduction. It had a lot of good statistics in there. Next week on April 12th, we will close up chapter 1 if we didn't get there and do chapter 2. That was the biggest chapter in the book. And then on the 19th, we'll do chapter 3 and finish with the evaluation. So we picked this book as it has several instances of injustice through that. And also this is a 20-year-old book and the statistics are still relevant today. Me and a colleague were talking about books that we had read. I read this book about 15 years ago and it still stayed with me. And he had read it as well in his undergrad. The book was accessible for the community. We had copies here at the library, we had posters around the community, and we had several copies at Irvington Presbyterian Church. So, as this is a community reading, community discussion, I'm going to open it up as far as what did you think so far regarding the foreword, the introduction, and chapter 1. So first, who has read all that the foreword and the introduction, chapter 1 already? All right. Anything standing out with people? I heard it's been a long time ago. It has. We did pass out books, and it has been quite a while ago. What do you think the relevance is of us discussing a 20-year-old book?
It's still important.
Is still important. Yeah, those statistics are still the same today. In some areas, it was even worse.
That's what I figured when I was reading it, is that even though the statistics were all outdated, I didn't anecdotally see that anything was any better.
Yeah, exactly. That the statistics aren't any better. Absolutely. Anything else?
One of the things that stood out for me is kind of personal. Thank God my parents pushed me in the way we did, because I lived in middle-class America. My dad was an iron worker, mom was a stay-at-home mom. There wasn't a lot of money. But there was an opportunity. They felt like education was important.
Good.
Wasn't able to realize that so much, how challenging and difficult it was. You know, to go to school, to go to graduate school, to, you know, eventually do all of that. And my dad had an 8th grade education.
Oh my goodness.
Mom had a high school education, but he lived during the Depression. But my point is, I grew up during this time where, you know, there wasn't a lot of financial opportunities. And how people get stuck in that. That's the realization, how they get stuck in that, and how do you get out? How do you get out?
So was this a good reminder, or did it bring up feelings of what you experienced once you got older?
Well, it's more reflective now, since I'm, you know, nearly 70, kind of looking back, you know, and all about how fortunate it was that I was able to find, you know, do that.
Way out.
You know, way to something else, but because it's so difficult to get out of it once you're in there. And Dad had a trade. He was a welder, so back then that was what was very important to move on, and you know, it was a good trade, and you could make a decent living. But what do you do now?
Exactly.
You know, I mean, that sort of common thing is, you know, like she was doing, you know, running the maid service. Is that the right chapter? Is this the maids, or is this?
She's serving in Florida.
Just serving. Okay,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, waitress.
Yeah, sorry.
You got
Waitress.
bonus points for knowing that was a
Yeah,
help.
okay. Yeah, I mean, how do you do that? I mean,
Yeah.
wow.
Did anybody else? Go ahead.
The thing that amazed me about it, all through it, was the housing issue. And you think of how many
Yeah.
people, because a lot of them, if you looked at what they made, especially working 2 jobs, it wouldn't be so bad if they had just having the deposit to rent. And I was surprised when I was in Florida that it's kind of elite to be living in a trailer. And you know how most of us probably live in trailer living. But, and you know, like, well, is it a later one? I was surprised that the place that housing was the most difficult of the 3 places that she lived. But, you know, that sometimes they were paying $1,000 a month because they were paying by the night or by the week.
Absolutely.
And that was 20 years ago. That was what just seemed the saddest, or, well, I don't know, that seemed really sad. You know, there's we live off of 40, and there's, between Indianapolis and Greenfield, and there's a lot of hotels along there. I mean, there's one that's abandoned, that's at the end of our street. But when we first built our house, there were people that lived there, and sometimes they'd walk in our neighborhood with their little kids, and it just always seemed so sad living there in the first place, but I really wondered what they were paying
Absolutely.
to live there. And I think that's just it. They just look a week at a time. You just kind of get in that mentality as part of the problem. maybe that's the wrong way to phrase it, but that just made me so sad.
So it alarmed me as well. Are we talking about people who are unemployed and underemployed, or are we talking about folks with housing issues? Where's the line, or are they meshed together? Any thoughts about that?
Say that again, please.
Are we talking about two different things, people being underemployed or unemployed, and the next one housing? Are those two the same for these folks? She had trouble with housing and finding jobs that could pay for the housing. So are those two separate silos, or are they meshed together?
I can say the system's rigged, if you can get it that way.
I would say they're very meshed together.
There are. that's
Because
what-
one
yeah.
just feeds the other. And as soon as you
Exactly.
fall behind on one or the other one, it just sucks you back in that cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
It's a vicious cycle.
And it just, yeah, it keeps pulling you down.
And
Well,
if-
then if you have anything that upsets the apple cart, like a car problem or a health problem.
Right.
Child care.
Childcare,
Yeah.
well, that's a big one.
Well, this book was written almost 20 years ago when I read it, and housing prices have gone up so much since then, but the minimum wage is only $7.50 in Indiana.
725.
$7.25?
Yeah.
Thank goodness I haven't worked for minimum
That's
wage.
what it says. Yeah.
But it has to be worse for people now. And so it's not necessarily just the minimum wage job people who are unhoused, but a lot of other people.
And go ahead.
I had a conversation today with someone whose adult child had to move back in because the rent she was in New York City, the rent went up 41% this year. And there was no other housing available anywhere. And this is somebody who had a job, making decent money, who had 2 jobs, making well over minimum, between $15 and $20 an hour, but couldn't afford any housing.
Absolutely.
And I've heard a couple other people talking about this, and it's been in some national news stories too, but to have that conversation with somebody today, that's unbelievable.
So
I know Lori at church, I remember right, she said her daughter,
That's
that's who it was.
That's who it was.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna.
I didn't know anything about that part. She said but no, this was like during COVID, she said they lowered the rent super low because people were leaving and stuff. And you kind of thought, okay, are they gonna come back? So I guess that's what happened.
That's exactly.
So I worked with a family yesterday that their rent next month was going up by $500. They live in a condo, they're renting it, and the renter believed that they could get $500 more. They gave them 30 days notice. Go ahead, yeah.
There was a statistic in one of these parts of the book that said only 1 in 6 people who are eligible for subsidized housing receive it. Now, I'm wondering, is that the case in Indianapolis?
So I actually go into an area on my slides down the road a little bit about, goodness, did I just do that? About Section 8 housing. We can jump there. Does anybody have any information on Section 8? Know anything about it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not a pro on slideshow, so give me a second, let me pull that up. Okay, so this was as of last week in Marion County. After applying to any of our lists for housing and urban development, it may take up to or more than 24 months before you may be selected from a waiting list to determine eligibility for assistance. So 2 years, and then you'll be in the pot to be able to get that voucher. Go ahead.
As you say, it's not just the availability and the cost, it's the combination of those.
Yes, so with that voucher, once you get that, I worked on the homeless team here in Indianapolis with the VA for several years, so I kind of have a little bit of idea of what's going on. You get your voucher, and then you have to have it filled by 120 days. So you have to find a lender or a renter who will take that government voucher. And then for a homeless family or a family that's struggling, you need social security cards for everybody in the house and birth certificates. that put up many roadblocks when I was doing housing for them to achieve those two things, because you're waiting on other agencies to provide that information. You need a banking account. A lot of times on such places as Walmart, I believe they're giving them cash cards now, just like how TANF is giving you cash cards that are not hooked to your bank account. If you don't have a vehicle to drive on your own for your own transportation, you're looking then for apartments or renters on the bus route or by taxi or Uber if you could afford it. And on Section 8, which is the Housing and Urban Development, the tenant pays 30%, and then Section 8 voucher covers the rest.
And something else that gets thrown in with subsidized housing is criminal record.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I sure have that. So somebody already brought this up. The first month and sometimes the last month rent is due up front. And then this is definitely true in Indianapolis. If you have a felony conviction of being a lifetime sex offender, or have been making meth in some type of federal housing, you are not able to have Section 8 housing. Any type of housing in Indianapolis, if you have that background, you are unable to have housing through the HUD program.
Holly,
Yes.
I have a question, and you may not know the answer to this. If you have been previously evicted, does that affect your ability to receive Section 8? Or, yeah, Section 8?
Honestly, I don't know. I assume they keep some type of record for the vouchers.
Okay, because I know if you try to get another apartment someplace else, it affects that, but I get permitted for assistance also.
Yeah, I'm unsure about that. Go ahead.
I know the lessors need to agree to take the rent check from HUD, but do they also have to have some quality control or inspections by HUD to make sure the housing is livable?
Yes. So let me see where I have that. Section 8, someone from HUD has to come out and evaluate that property. And they have 2 months to do that. If your voucher ends and you don't have that property established, you're going to lose your voucher and you're going to go back into the pool with all the other folks.
So each time a tenant moves out and a new one moves in, it has to be reevaluated?
Yes. Yep. Anything else regarding HUD or Section 8 or the struggles with that? A tenant or a renter has to be willing to take a tenant who has Section 8, but through the book it talked about it, and online also it talked that sometimes they find issues with the apartment that they would know that would not qualify for passing the Section 8 evaluation, or pets, or whatever they can do to discriminate. Okay. Close your eyes because I'm popping back several slides, and this is Holly's special slideshow. Okay. We kind of talked about this. Are you surprised that the 20-year-old statistics are still relevant today? And why not?
I say surprised, no, disheartened, yes.
Absolutely. Surprised, no, disheartened, yes. That just gave me the chills. Yeah.
Nothing has changed in the system, in the structures. It's actually gotten worse. So, you know, it's not a surprise.
One thing that I wonder about, and I haven't read the book for a long time, but one thing that might be different now could be the job market. I don't remember what it was like 20 years ago, but is it possible that employers are more desperate now to find people who will work for them than they were 20 years ago? But even at that, I was struck in the book by how hard it is to even leave your current job to go pursue a different job. So even if the job market is better, that doesn't always mean that you can take advantage of it.
And in today's world, we're throwing COVID in on top of that, right? a whole new thing. Go ahead,
And
sir.
also the food prices.
Right.
It's mentioned in here that the food prices have stayed steady or were not a big concern as much as the housing, but that's out the window too today.
Absolutely.
Gas.
Gas,
Yeah.
gas, oh my goodness, yeah. I don't know if I could afford a Uber from one side, from Carmel to Greenwood. To
The
look for
the
housing.
positive of now, in some cases, I think employers are paying more than they would like to pay because the job market is so tight, having to get employees. Because I know, and it's kind of amazed me since COVID, how so many places have changed their hours, and it seems to be a pretty permanent thing. Because I think they've realized, like all the Walmarts aren't open all night like they used to be, and you think of how many more employees you have that you have to pay, and then I think you just kind of look at, okay, when do you make the most money, and you can keep, so I think there must be a formula in that, and in a way, some of it I think is good, because it's kind of ridiculous, some of the hours that's kind of spoiled us, that you can go to the grocery store anytime. Of course, I don't work all day and have to shop at 3 in the morning, but still, I think there's enough hours that you can, so that might be, I think, a positive thing from COVID, that there's some reality check on that. But in some cases, probably people are making more than they would, because it's easier, because since you can just go out and get a job. I remember when my kids were in high school and they got their first jobs, I wanted to make sure they had a really good ethic. It was hard to get a job. I know when I was in high school, it was really hard because people didn't go out to eat all the time.
Right.
That's what really opened up the job market. And a lot of these jobs, okay, they're working hard and this and that, but, I kind of like the idea of my kids having those kind of jobs to make them want to pursue something better. Which, to be doing that when you're 60 years old, like the author was,
Yeah.
and the people she described working with, it just...
Did it surprise you that she was all gung-ho? She was at that expensive lunch meeting and the publisher, I believe it was saying, yeah, you're going to do this. Were you surprised she said, okay, I'm ready to leave my current comfortable life and do that? Yes, sir.
I would argue that level of comfort probably makes you think that it's not that bad.
Probably.
You can always come back home eventually.
She knew there was an end. I mean, that was one thing that I had to keep remembering, was that she knew that this was going to end, that this wasn't going to be.
Well, and she was reluctant, I was like,
Yeah.
I did think throughout the book, I don't know if I think she'd been an author for quite some time, so I don't think she was used to even as traditional of a job as most of us have had. And so there were times that some of the things she was critical of in the job maybe was worse than normal, but I think, being a writer, I think she wasn't at the mercy of, maybe a publisher and stuff like that, but I haven't walked in her shoes, so I shouldn't judge. But I think that probably even more so threw her for a loop, because maybe when she was younger, she had jobs that you had to follow rules that you thought were stupid. All of us have had, probably,
Sure.
any job you had at any time, you think, you roll your eyes, whether visually or...
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to point out that maybe people are paying a little more now, but $15 an hour, you're still not going to be able to save up money for $1,000 payment to rent somewhere. And everything has gone up in price so much since 2005.
Absolutely.
So it's maybe pretty equal. I don't have the facts and figures for that, but it
Sure.
would be in the general range of being fairly equal.
Absolutely.
Well, I would say, we all drive by establishments and they'll say, they've got a sign out that will say, we're paying $16 or $17, but if you look at it in little bitty, it says up to. And so they're really not paying the $16 or whatever it is an hour. They're probably paying maybe 10. And so there's an illusion that, oh wow, all these places are paying $16, $17, $18 an hour, and they're not. They're maybe paying 10. And my background is in the restaurant industry, of seeing the food service industry, and so people are not making great money in that. And I just saw one restaurant, they were advertising for a manager of a restaurant. And if you're a manager of a restaurant, before COVID, you were working 60 hours
Yeah.
a week. And now it's probably even more because you don't have staff now. And it was $17 an hour. And I'm, you know, I don't want to work that hard. I don't want to work $17 an hour and work 60 to 80 hours a week. It's a lot.
Anybody else want to jump in here before I move on?
Well, I think, I would say, you know, what's wrong with the world here? Because we've got 20 years and it's still here. I think the system is sort of designed that, I don't want to sound too socialistic here, but designed that workers are nothing more than just sort of machines that you sort of use up and throw away and hire somebody else in. I mean, it just sort of rotates on that. And it keeps everything kind of where it is. I mean, 20 years, it probably goes back further than that, but how do you get out to make, you know, a decent living? And we're not even talking about this. This is a church group. We're not even talking about any sort of spiritual revelation of your work. I mean, doesn't that open up? I mean, should that not be a part of it? You're just basically Pavlovian sort of basic survival stuff, right? Feed the mouth.
Yep.
Don't bump into anything.
Are you?
I'm not signaling you might actually have
Yeah.
a statement, but it's coming up on 7. The book mentioned a thing about statistics about how we measure where poverty is, and the statistic that we're using is food. But the things that are more expensive than that and have got more than food are the things that actually impoverish people.
Right.
I think about phones now compared to 20 years ago. And, you know, because she, I don't know, at some point in the book she talks about hanging out in her room hoping to get calls about housing or jobs.
Yeah.
And you think people did have cell phones at that time, but it wasn't as mainstream as it is now, that you'd have a hard time getting a job now without a cell phone.
Well,
Even if you got a, you know, a pay by the month thing or.
So when Obama was in office, they had something called the Obama phone. Anybody hear that? Yeah. Anybody want to tell everybody what it's about? The Obama phone.
It's a government subsidized phone. So,
Okay, heard of it.
I haven't
yeah.
so it's trying to basically negate the issue that you can't get information about how to get a job without a phone. Or access to services provided to the indigent without a phone.
So
Have you ever seen the tents outside of like a Walgreens or something?
Yeah.
Where they're advertising phone service, those are all based on the same sorts of information you use to get Medicaid.
Exactly. Yep.
Interesting.
Alrighty.
Well, I also wanted to say Indiana is one of the worst states in the nation as far as tenants' rights goes. And the people in our legislature don't value the people who work hard for a living.
Sure.
In my opinion, anybody who works hard deserves enough to live on well. It doesn't matter if they're a physicist or somebody wiping down the tables. But a lot of the people who are making the decisions in this society do think it makes a difference if you're a physicist or wiping down the tables.
Well, and I really thought maybe the while we went through the pandemic, the curtain was raised as to who was really essential to keeping society moving ahead. The trash people,
Yeah.
the grocery people, all of those people were essential to everyday life, and yet they still, for a brief moment in history, they were praised and all this. But now, I mean,
We made him a
Yeah.
poster.
Yeah.
I guess I missed
They want a living wage too?
I guess I missed
Sang
that.
songs.
I have a family member that works in the food service, and she's just turned 41. Anyway, she has always done that. She works at good restaurants, but when COVID hit and the restaurant closed, she struggled. And I remember I saw her, what was it, last year at Mother's Day, and she was it was right after when the restaurants first opened, and she said, gosh, she said, people were so grateful to be back. She got $400 in tips the first night. She said, this is great. Well, then I saw her a year later, and you can tell everybody's attitudes kind of changed in the last 6 months especially. I'm tired of this. And so so now it's like that kumbaya. Now it's a lot worse than it was before COVID. It's people are angry, and sometimes you take it out on the clerk at the grocery store, or which that doesn't really connect to the book, so I apologize.
No, you're okay. I was trying to pull up the slides related to that.
But the vulnerability of those kind of jobs, whether it's COVID or no COVID, you can just see they're more vulnerable than some jobs are.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. So Matthew Desmond, he was in the Ford, and he said, in this country, anyone can work their way out of poverty if they simply put in enough effort. What are we thinking about that these days?
It's condescending and boring.
Yeah, condescending.
It's very condescending.
Well, it provides a fig leaf for the systemic issues. It's like, well, if certain people, if they do it, look where we are, we all work hard, so if they just follow that plan, then we're there.
Well, that also assumes that everyone has that model in their life of working hard, and if you don't have that model in your life, then that's not an inborn thing. I mean, so it's hard to work your way out of it, and some people they have no role models to have shown them that.
And then you'll hear about folks who, the 1 in 100,000 or whatever, who do make their way out of it, and being a self-made person and all that. So if that person can do it, well, why can't you do it too? And that's just a fallacy.
Behind the bootstraps.
That's why we heard about that person, because they were so unusual.
Right, but then that gets justified, to kind of dismiss it away.
Oftentimes, the person who makes a comment such as that, or that poor people are lazy or whatever like that, they forget that they had second chances when they made a mistake. Nobody's saying they didn't work hard, but when they had a problem or made a mistake, they had something to fall back on, somebody to help them have a second chance. And a lot of people get out of school and they never have another chance.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is such an ingrained myth in our society. I mean, look all the way back in the Horatio Alger days, in the books that were written back then. And that was the message there. And what it's done, it takes away, it's if anyone can work their way out. It shifts everything to the individual. It's really subtle language. It shifts it to the individual and takes any kind of community aspect out of this whole issue. And it shifts the blame then onto the individual and away from the collective in society. And that infuriates me.
I might say that because we are built on the rough individualism. I mean, that is America, and it has been. It's a part of our myth. It's perpetuated constantly. It's subtle, but it's so wrong. No. I mean, this gets passed off very easily.
Yeah.
Who really, we're protesting about it, but a lot of people say, oh yeah, sure, why not? And it's just passed on down. And I think we forget the collective, like you said. The community, the feeling of compassion with others and building a sense of community like other cultures do in the world. And certain cultures in Australia and others that would not be a part of everybody. Even the American Indian that kind of thinking, that would be called ignorant. And that's to ignore what is obvious, that we're missing the collective community in all of this.
And then it's just very easy to dismiss people.
Yes.
Because, it's not that we as a collective did anything wrong to fail this person. That person is a failure. Look what they've done with themselves.
Right.
And then we can just go on our happy little way.
But there's nobody that's ever succeeded without the support of the community they live in.
Right.
Whether it's their church community, I mean, like for children, when you're raising children, You need the church community, you need the education community, you need other pieces of the community at large that can impact them through service projects or things like that they're doing. So when you raise a successful child, you have not done that by yourself. You're not out in the middle of nowhere doing that and teaching them. All these people that your child interacts with at school, at church, just when they're out and about in the community, all have an impact on that. And I was,
all have a responsibility.
and we have a responsibility as adults to teach whatever child, whatever person's child, whatever age that person's child is, when they come in contact with us, and show them love and compassion and caring, and give them a leg up. The piece in this first chapter that really got me was on page 47. Says, I arrived with their first tray of food after 3 prior trips just to refill beverages. Princess Di refused to eat her chicken strips with her pancake and sausage special since, as she now reveals, the strips were meant to be an appetizer. I cannot tell you, I mean, that just sounds absurd. I cannot tell you how many times both of my daughters have told me stories like that about people. And they say the worst people are the people that come in after church.
Yeah.
They don't tip. They want everything now. They want blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
And they just. I'm sorry.
I think she's right.
I got more to say. But one of the things that I felt when I read that chapter was, I want to take care of my server in a restaurant, because her or his boss is not at $2.13 an hour. That's not even enough to pay their taxes. They don't have any health care insurance. They don't have any way to have retirement.
And they have to share the tips.
And they have to share tips, is exactly right. They share them with, which is okay to share them, because there's other workers that don't get tips.
Okay.
Well,
I'm sorry. I went ahead and pulled that up just so we all could see it. That right now in Indiana, server is making $2.13 an hour, and then if they don't meet that $7.25, the restaurant or wherever they're doing has to meet them at that amount. But tips also can be split with bussers, kitchen staff, bartenders. Who is surprised by that number? I about fell out of my chair when I saw $2.13 an hour.
Well, and I waited table. I've had, with the exception of the housekeeping job, I've had just about every job that she had, childcare instead of elder care, but I waited tables right out of college before I started my first teaching job, and I made $2.13 an hour.
Oh my goodness, what year was that?
That was 1994.
94, already.
I waited tables for a long time too, and there were times where I had a negative check because my earnings, I had enough tips that I had to pay them for my taxes.
Ouch.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's so many of us that go into a restaurant and we expect all this stuff, and we want, and we make our orders difficult, and and we don't tip the servers, and even a family member was mouthing off about tipping, and I'm not going to tip them because they I was like, okay, I didn't argue with them.
I wonder how many people know how this works, because I was just 18, but my first job I was a busboy, and I always thought tipping was just like an extra amount of money that a server got. And when we got our first checks and one of the servers was talking to me about how much they made per hour, I was shocked. And I guess I would have figured it out by now even if I hadn't worked in a restaurant, but I do wonder if there are a lot of people out there who don't really understand that tipping isn't like they don't know that tipping is an essential part of a server's income, that it's just more of a bonus for them.
Well, the hostesses make more money than the servers do.
Busboys made more money.
More per hour, yeah.
After I read this the first time, many years ago, I just was just like, oh my gosh, I could not believe, you know, I knew about tipping, but I make sure now, you know, and even after reading the book, to like in a hotel room. And like, if you ever go to a state park, do you ever see the little envelope, you know, and it's like, okay, I always make sure I have some money to tip the people that are cleaning your room.
Absolutely.
You know, because they're struggling.
And that's one that's not really highlighted as much as tipping a server, that you need to tip the hotel.
Something I thought was interesting in the book, I think it was in the first chapter, she talked about, she thought if you did a really good job, that you would get recognition, maybe not financial, but it's just like, and then it almost seemed like in a couple of jobs that she had in the book, the person that rose to the next little pecking order up, they kind of got a little kind of abusive to the employees. And it kind of surprised me that they weren't a little, you know, that they weren't as encouraging. It's kind of like they were so proud that, okay, well, they're below me. Even though it wasn't much below. But I was surprised in all these jobs there, because sometimes it seems like there are some people in these types of restaurants even that aren't living hand to mouth. And you know, some people did have more of a support system financially, you know, even if they just had a spouse. But you know, if you get kids in the picture, that kind of,
Go ahead, Jill. Having kids in the picture and serving, and my husband worked a lot, and so he was gone, and I'd have to hire a babysitter too. So if I couldn't make at least, you know, X number of dollars, I'm paying a babysitter $5 an hour to be with my child. And if I have a 5-hour shift, and $25 of what I make has to go pay my babysitter, then I come home with $20, you know, and that's really,
absolutely. My kids have worked for 10, 12, 15 hours and come home with $50.
Yeah, well, ouch, yeah.
Do you think in the book it said restaurants are supposed to make up the difference, but that a lot of people, they didn't know that, so they weren't getting the difference. Is that probably, my guess would be, there's still bad employers out there that still do that, don't make it up?
I'm sure employers don't educate their wait staff is.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in here? Go ahead.
Yeah, we got a granddaughter that works as a flight attendant.
Oh, okay.
And when the doors are open, $2 an hour.
Oh, goodness.
That's all they get.
Really?
Really?
And they don't get paid until that door closed.
Oh, wow.
Huh. I had no idea.
And during that time, they have to clean the airplane. No matter what people have done to the seats and the floor and everything else, they've got to clean it all over.
Wow.
That's huge. I had no idea.
That's $2 an hour. They're making good wages.
Shut the door.
When the door is shut.
That's where they're trying to get them out.
Have somebody go shut the door sometimes.
And then sometimes they're on call, so they may have to be on call for 8 hours or 10 hours in the airport. And if they don't need them, they're making $2 an hour during that time too.
Just hanging out in the airport?
Yep.
Oh, my.
So,
Well, the glamour of that job.
yeah.
I guess I won't try for
All right.
And they have to buy their uniforms and everything else too. Yeah, they get, in COVID, people have really treated them very bad.
Oh, with the mask.
That one girl, she got her teeth knocked out. That one stewardess, and well, not a stewardess anymore, flight attendant.
Gotta be PC.
She about dies every time I say stewardess. But yeah, and get called all kinds of names.
Actually, the last flight I was on, the woman next to me tipped the flight attendant very, very graciously. And I had never thought of that.
And they're not allowed to accept
She
tips.
said, no, I can't. She said, yes, you can. Put it in your pocket.
I know.
So don't tell
Well,
that there was an older fella and he didn't know where he was sitting. He went to the bathroom and he couldn't figure out where he was at and did that 2 or 3 times. And when he got off the plane, the guy behind him grabbed her hand and shook it.
Because she walked him to the bathroom
Yeah.
and back, said,
Yep,
take
you know,
my
she said-
arm,
she said,
you know. And she said, oh, you're so wonderful to take my arm. And so he thought he was helping her. And so this other man gave her a tip when he left. He took both her hands and shook her hand and put the money in her hand and said, thank you for what you did for him.
Yeah.
And she said that meant a lot. It wasn't the money. He did give her a very nice tip. It was just after somebody called you terrible names when they're leaving the airplane. And she said, I just tell them, well, you have a wonderful day. She said, the more I throw onto that, then it just makes them more mad.
Well, and I always think of this. Our son went to college in St. Paul, Minnesota, and decided to stay. And people will say, oh, why do they stay up there? The weather's so terrible. And he and his girlfriend, she's not from there either, but they stay up there. And we're like, oh, well, they just settled in. But no, they stay up there because St. Paul, Minneapolis has a set minimum wage of $15 or $16, even for wait staff. And she's not our daughter-in-law, but our son's very serious life partner. She waits tables at a bougie arts and crafts place that's really pretty cool. And she makes, I think their wait staff makes a basic wage of $12 an hour, then plus tips. And sometimes just with the location and where she's at, she'll come home at $200 a night, plus $12 an hour. There's no way we could convince them to come back to Indianapolis for $2.13 an hour right now.
No.
It's just not going to happen right now.
Yeah, for sure. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So you have to like go and then leave.
So we keep going up to Minneapolis. Yeah.
Okay, I know Craig is going to teach me this before the night's over, but close your eyes again because I'm going back. Why does it keep popping? Okay, so this was interesting to me. This is from the 2021 census as well. Multiple jobs holding was common for low-wage workers. Women more likely than men to be working more than one job. Addition, those juggling more than one occupation earned less on average than people who had only one job.
I'm not doing that.
So they're making less working 2 jobs than one person making 1 job.
Transportation.
Doesn't surprise me at all.
That's why they don't jump out of the kitty.
If you're working at 2 restaurants.
Yeah.
And if you look at the fields, server, maid, flight attendant, they are female-dominated professions.
Oh, sure.
And so, there you go. That's a big part of it. I have too, so.
The example provided in the book, just like, hey, I need a second job, but I need it to be compatible with the job that I have.
Right.
So it's like, well, these both sound great, but I can't do both.
Exactly.
So you're that way.
Well, and when she was working the 2 jobs, she talked a lot of just the endurance and the toll that it took on her body that hadn't been doing that its whole life. And I just thought about, for a while I worked in a supervisory position for direct care staff for adults with disabilities. And we would have a lot of staff who either worked for another residential company or worked another job, and they would work 8 hours, and then they would come and watch adults with disabilities for 8 hours. We were a no-sleep facility, so they could not go to sleep.
Right.
And we had to let a lot of people go because they would fall asleep over that night shift because they worked another job all day and they were exhausted.
And also Barbara in that book, she said that,
You know, a lot of her coworkers were sick all the time. They couldn't afford health insurance if it was even offered. Chronic illnesses were not being taken care of. And don't even think about any type of retirement plan or doing investment, broking, anything like that for these folks, which
to go back to the quote, the whole bootstrap idea, people are working these 2 jobs. They're working very hard. They're putting all of this effort in. So right there is the lie to it all. It doesn't matter how hard you work.
Yeah.
It's not going to be lucrative for you.
Exactly. Okay. So, raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. I threw out a few questions in here. Would this be helpful for the working poor? Goodness, sorry. Would it, quote, lift people out of poverty? Is working a minimum wage an actual living wage? Could you work for that $15 and be in a better situation? And would the working poor be able to only need to work 1 job to make ends meet? So I opened that up to you guys to see what you think.
I think it depends. I mean, what else are we doing here with that? I mean, like we had some, I don't know what the technical term is, but some help with child care not long ago. The government offered that as a credit. That helps tremendously. When you don't have to take that $15 an hour, now I've got to pay somebody to watch my kiddo, which in the state of Indiana is astronomical. It's like third in the nation. I looked it up today. It's horrible. How do you do that? And that's not helpful. What about health insurance? I mean, that whole thing about how do I get health insurance? Because that's, for a young person, maybe not so bad, but you move it up into 30s or 40s, you're going to be in the doctor. That's going to cost a lot of money. So it depends. You just can't say $15 an hour. That's going to cut it all. Not happening.
$15 an hour, 40 hours a week for 50 weeks. I gave them 2 weeks off, but they're not going to get paid for it. Is $30,000 a year. And that's pre-tax. That's pre-tax.
And poverty is 24. And is that for 1 person?
That's
like for living for 1 person. What if you got a family of 4? Oh my gosh. You can't even really make it on that.
And also add the cost for renting an apartment, or if you can rent a house or get a house. Would we be lifting people out of poverty then?
No. Yeah. No.
Well, it's a start. If you put in those other supports, it would help. But it wouldn't help by itself.
Not by itself.
What additional supports would we need besides for the ones we've already talked about?
Transportation.
Yes, a good transportation system. That would. Okay, jump in here.
We talked about this at the beginning, where you restrict on where you can live because you don't have transportation. So that's a particular problem here in Indianapolis that we're working on. But for other cities,
yeah, but it costs
money to.
It costs a lot of money, even if you had your own car and you were working someplace downtown and you had to pay for parking.
So, maybe 2 years ago, I was working with some homeless folks. They got an apartment through a HUD voucher, and they found work at the Amazon warehouse by the airport. They were living on the east side. They couldn't, transportation was not dependable on the bus system, getting all those. And of course, Amazon it was like 1 a.m. start time or something. So that crossed everything out too. So just as you were saying, the work was somewhat available, but access and means to that work, it was impossible.
And if you are dependent upon public transportation, that adds. It's so slow, and you're on that bus. You could be on it forever, and so that takes away less time that you could work another job. It takes away time that you could be with your kids, extra childcare costs, and
Sleep.
Must sleep.
Yeah. What about sleep?
Go sleep on the bus.
Couldn't sleep on the job, you'd lose your job.
lose your job if you fall asleep.
Lose your job if you or 2 jobs on your feet as a waitress back to back. Okay. Anybody else want to jump in here before I move on?
No, I think $15 an hour, yeah, that sounds really, I'll say it, sexy, you know. Wow. But it really does, when you think about what it goes towards, you don't end up with much of a boost unless you have some other supports.
People that make $15 an hour still qualify for HIP, which is Medicaid in Indiana.
Yeah.
And maybe they pay a little bit, but then to jump through all the hoops that you jump through to get Medicaid as a young adult is crazy.
Yeah. So our measurement for poverty is both incorrect and leveled incorrectly.
And a few years ago, didn't they change some of the metrics? And
Right.
so all of a sudden it looked like, oh my gosh, all of these people are no longer in poverty.
Right.
It was just playing with the numbers.
I think that's another
And so, yeah.
Go ahead. I'll add something too. When I was in the school system, I processed all the free and reduced applications for the kiddos for the school district and that. And so I worked with a lot of families, and I would have someone call me because they got a promotion at work, and the way it is, I would tell them, you can keep this for the entire school year. This benefit for the week. If you want it stopped, we can stop it. But you are entitled to this benefit for the entire school year. So would that help you on catching up on some other things? And they were like, oh my gosh, that would be huge. And people don't realize that they can continue to do that. But it was so many, especially after 2008 and everything crashed, it was surprising to me how many divorces occurred at that time, that men left their families, and there were so many women at that time. I was dealing with a lot of women who had not worked out of the home and were trying to find a job, and then they were still trying to figure out childcare and how am I going to feed my kids. And it was like, you don't have to worry about that piece. You know, breakfast and lunch is taken care of for your kids. You don't have, you know, and staying on the program. But, you know, I'm making $12 an hour now. Well, you know, that's not enough.
I think one of the things that we could do to really support people on $15 an hour is if that puts them just over a limit, not take that service away.
Absolutely.
For a year or a year and a half to whatever, you know, to give them time to catch up. Because what I would hear from my clients and my families when I worked in IPS and I worked for the health department in Marion County, they would get extra money and they would have other bills they had to pay, but then they'd lose the service.
Yeah,
and
priced out of the service.
You know, because well, you gotta have a cutoff. Well, yeah, but you gotta have a shade of gray somewhere.
Sure.
You know, around the black and the white.
Not if you're an MBA. The MBAs don't look at the world that way, and the MBAs have written all the rules for the last 20 to 30 years.
I know.
And surely their time is about gone.
Yeah, they didn't ask the teachers, they didn't ask the social workers, they didn't ask the nurses, they didn't ask the...
Because it's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And that's what's the important thing.
Well, Marion County did away with 2/3 of their public health nurses. I had worked at the health department, then I was down in the school system in one of the suburban ones. And while I was there, I found out that 2/3 of the nurses were gone. Now we have so like 50 nurses for the whole county. That sounds like a lot, but when we had 150, you know, or a little more, you know, we had more than 2 or 3 district health offices, and it served the community much better for what they did. But because they couldn't, their services were free, and they didn't bring in money.
It was good. Yeah. Okay.
I want to go back to that question. She didn't get the services the next year. I mean, she could finish out that year, but the next year.
And then it would be just what Mary's talking about. Then she made $25 more a year, and that kicked her out of the program.
Yeah, that's what.
And that's been my contention all along on that is you don't, the whole thing on free and reduced, if you qualify, just don't even do the reduced. Just you know, if you qualify, you qualify. And then there needs to be a gap time of you continue that benefit where you are above it more than $25, you know. Because there were folks that when they fill out the application, it's, how often do you get paid? Well, and it's weekly, bi-weekly, bi-monthly, and that makes a difference if you're getting paid every 2 weeks or if you're getting paid twice a month. And so, you know, I'm working with, okay, I can't give them the right answer, you know, but I'm kind of like, okay, so when do you get your paycheck? You know, because if it's twice a month, they're not making as much as they are if you're every 2 weeks and stuff. And it is tough to have those conversations with people, and it's kind of like, I can't tell them how much they're over, or you know that they're making $3.25 more a pay than that. And I just say, if anything changes, if anything at all changes, you need to call me immediately. And that, I mean, that's all I could do for them. But there needs to be that gap when people are in that, so they can get ahead. You know, so they can build up that emergency fund for a spare time.
Or that people can be individuals. And you can make a call that, hey, this family needs
I know this family's going through some extra stuff.
Right.
And, yeah, I don't know what voodoo magic happened that our school, our township, all students are free lunch.
And that's the big question.
And I don't know how that happened, but I worry about
the percentage of people who qualify for free over this.
Will you share your school district? What school district's that?
Warren.
But what's amazed me is here during COVID, all schools are now free. Carmel schools are all free. Everybody is free.
Franklin Township is not free.
Not during COVID?
No.
Even, yeah, we have a teacher whose kids go to the
We still did.
A lot of them have gone, okay, then that's
This social worker is not making millions of dollars.
Yeah, Holly's like, trust me, I'm paying for lunch.
Because they were able to with the USDA, right, because right now there's
the funding, the special
funding, and they're trying to get that, so it's passed again to get that extended again. But, and it was like, okay, if we could do that during this time, then why can't we, if we can figure it out and do it then why can't we do that
missed the deadline
of getting that for kiddos all the time? So,
and it's not just that, it's several other things. If we're able to do this during this emergency fund,
right.
Please, student loan forgiveness.
Right.
You know, all of these things might happen.
Why not?
So why can't we? And it goes back to that individual versus community.
Correct. Correct.
Anybody else before I move on? 7:35. All right. We did that. We've talked a little bit about COVID and how COVID's affecting everything in the world. Community centers with COVID, assistance with bills, vaccinations. Anybody want anything, or should I move on?
One thing that I found is interesting, and I've heard some anecdotal things, as COVID started to recede in some places and people started to go back to work, that families made the decision that only one spouse would go back because they realized I'm paying all that entire salary is going to child care or to whatever, and so it's not worth it for me to go back. And so when, that's one of the causes of, the people say, well, nobody wants to work anymore. There are all these unfilled jobs. Yes, because people have made the decision not to go back because it doesn't make any sense for them to go back.
And
for $10 an hour.
For $10 an hour.
And with this slide, I was also thinking our social communities, those who are giving food banks and other resources, so our working poor or unemployed are able to eat, they had the shutdown periods. What did these folks do during those periods? If they were visiting Westminster or the ICANN and gain resources that way, and it was closed during COVID, where were they going? And were they going somewhere and they have new resources that we don't know about? Or were they just eating bread and doing the best they could.
I think there were some creative restaurateurs, maybe not here in Indianapolis so much, but I saw stories on the news that there were some people that were cooking and taking the food out.
Okay.
So that they could, especially at the beginning when they had all that food, that they bought for, and then everything was closed. And then, so they were helping out that way, but I think there were some people that kept doing that.
I think a lot of the schools still provided, I mean, I know my son-in-law's he was a principal and he had to go out and distribute food and at least they did it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they did it, that next school year
our school system
if the
had
school was
drive-up.
closed, if it went virtual, I think they, I just wonder, that's just another thing with the schools coming and going with virtual and not virtual and this and that. Some people don't have anyone readily to watch their kids and go to work. And even, it's not ideal leaving teenagers home alone. You get your work done today and you'd be online and I've heard some real crazy stories.
Yeah, we had
about
a lot of students that if they did show up online, we had one, she had little siblings crawling all over, trying to get her attention, she's trying to listen, and yeah, we had a lot of students that were put in charge of childcare. And so if they, if you're watching your 2-year-old, whatever, niece, nephew, brother, sister, you often didn't log on to school.
They were saying on NPR the other day that there's still kids that they haven't found since the end of COVID. Like, what happened to these children? Go ahead.
It isn't just poverty, it's generational poverty and communal poverty. So this whole Bootstrap's idea, people are finding creative ways. What they're doing is leveraging their communities, their schools, their families. So how did they eat? Well, maybe the kids went to grandma's house and ate there, and then ate, breakfast and lunch, and then, stayed with aunt and uncle while they did that stuff. They're finding ways, but that doesn't mean that those ways are good.
They're not consistent, so it's all a,
you do what you have to.
everything's up in the air, and so the kids are not having some consistency in where they're going to go or who they're going to be with, or
I'm not gonna lie, our house was survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
We were like, gotta go to work.
Hope there's some food in the fridge for you guys.
All right, I'm gonna move on here. So housing costs pose the greatest obstacle for low-wage workers. What does our society seem to resist rectifying this situation? Do you believe that there are realistic solutions to the lack of affordable housing?
The largest number of housing owners, landlords, are private individuals, and that's moving towards businesses. So our society is built on making money, and so people who own houses want to make money.
I see we only have 20 more minutes. I want to introduce another topic real quick as our last one. I hear oof. Somebody in their own words tell me what you guys think with gentrification.
on the surface, I don't like it.
Tell me more.
I don't know if there is more because I was stuck there.
Okay.
I mean, I don't like the aspect of going in and changing something that doesn't really fit in with the neighborhood that they're in. And then it also costs so much more money, and I don't know. That's where I am.
Yeah. Good.
It's like the, I hate the term, but it's like the opposite of white flight. Because, back in just thinking of Irvington, we didn't live here at the time, but just from things I know and I've heard, is that, a population moved out of Irvington, moved to Franklin Township, moved to, other outside. And so then what that did was, property values tanked, so then poorer working class folks moved in, and now all of the people, or a lot of the people who lived out there in the districts, in the townships, now it's fashionable to move back into the city centers because it's cheaper, because of and so what it's doing then, it's jacking property values way up, so those people who moved in 20 years ago, 30 years ago, are being priced out. So now it's just a displacement.
Yeah.
And so now, out in Warren Township and down in Franklin Township, that you're getting these housing additions that were put up in, back in the 80s, 90s,
Sure.
and the vinyl villages that were out there that now are becoming affordable for the working and poor folks who are being pushed out of the city centers. And we see it everywhere.
I read an article in the paper about the whole, where they're building the new jail and everything.
Yes.
That neighborhood over there. And a lot of the history of that neighborhood has, been kind of pushed aside and not really paid attention to. And it was like, it made me sad and disgusted, and why do we always have to push people out?
Well, you think about the neighborhood around Heron High School, where our kids went to school. There was a time, 30, 40 years ago, that they were almost giving those houses away.
Not even that long ago.
And to take it over, and now they're $500,000 houses.
And Indianapolis, I think, is interesting because we have that transportation issue still. So we are kicking out the people who used to live there, the traditional families, that are now living somewhere else and needing to come back to that area for their jobs or for resources. And Irvington's doing it. Has anyone not heard of this before? This topic, or anyone new to it?
Urban displacement?
Yes.
Gentrification.
Gentrification. Okay.
And another kind of that's a result of this is that you're getting groups of people who can't even afford the housing out in those other areas, and so you're getting more and more of the multi-generational, multi-family units living in the same houses.
Yes,
and they're it's just chronic couch surfing.
Steal more.
Way to go, Marlon. That was good.
You're getting a lot more crime. You're getting violence. You're getting, on the east side, look at where the police runs are. Look at where they're, violence.
And think
murder.
about that district where they were working and living in the same district. Now they're driving into that district that they don't know people, the neighborhood people anymore.
Right. And I think that affects the community too.
It does.
If you're not a part of what's going on, you can't.
How do we solve that problem?
Goodness.
So where would you like to?
I'm serious. You think about, you sort of designate a particular area as being in poverty, being poor. All right. Well, how do us who are not in that category, how do we help that particular situation?
I think there are. It's not all like good and bad. There are things that are happening, like King Park, which is basically just a little northeast of downtown. The whole neighborhood was impoverished, and there are new market rate housing being built there, but there also are programs to preserve affordable housing and to help people buy houses. And I think that gets back to the whole idea of, there was a time when you would just build this big concrete bunker and fill it with people who were in poverty. And I think having neighborhoods that have mixed incomes is really healthy. So,
Well, and I think that's true too. That's where, my initial thing with this, but if it's done in a way where
sensitive.
yeah, it's mixed and we're all in this together and we're not, trying to make ourselves look do and we're going to take over the neighborhood. But if you come together with a common purpose to work with the neighborhood,
So could we bring that clean neighborhood model here somehow? Would that be a good thing to do?
Yeah, I think there are community development corporations that would like to do that, but they're not all run very well. And so
The way that Indianapolis has historically addressed this, redlining specifically, has been by force busing. So like we move kids around to create mixed neighborhoods, and then families kind of figure out, oh wait, we can migrate, kind of how it's slow, and people resist it. I think if you remember, this is before I lived in Indianapolis, but people lost their minds. When he said you're going to take my kid and move them somewhere else.
right. And the child is being moved out away from the home area, and then the parent can't get to the child's activities to support the child, or
There were
there's a whole bunch of those
5-year-old
issues.
kids that lived at 38th and College that were bused to Franklin Township when I was working down there. And I was the nurse down there, and trying to get a parent to come and pick up their sick child was horrible. And it was so unfair because they didn't even know anything about Franklin Township.
Right.
They didn't have the transportation to get down there.
No bus.
There's no bus down there. There's nothing. Well, there was no bus to any of the schools. So imagine your kid's out in Acton, and he's 5 years old, and he's the only one, maybe two in the class.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it was a good solution. I'm saying that's what we did.
I know, but that's the kind of, to me, that's the kind of thoughtlessness and, there's another word I'm looking for that's not coming to my mind. Huh?
That's a lot of words.
Yeah, but I mean, it's just, to me, it's cruel. It's absolutely cruel to do that to a family. When I went to IPS, I was talking with a parent who I had left my school and gone downtown to be the nursing coordinator, and I was also in charge of helping kids with disabilities get door-to-door busing. And this lady called me, and I had just seen her son's 504 plan and realized he was...
Explain 504. Some people probably don't know what a 504 is.
It's a plan that helps, that requires the school to make accommodations for kids that don't meet the requirement for special ed.
It's for medical needs.
It's for medical needs, and medical can be mental health as well as physical health. So this kid was hard of hearing, and I had read that, and I thought, okay, then his mom called me. And I said, oh yeah, I'm already got him, I'm gonna put him on the bus, and the bus gonna pick him up at the house. And she was so relieved. But then I ran into her at one of the schools, and we got to talking, and this was more important than that even. But she was so grateful, but we got to talking, and do you remember Perry Wren, the policeman that got shot? And I forget the guy's name that shot him. And Perry had been involved with the guy's dad and had killed the guy's dad or something. But anyway, the guy killed Perry. And she knew him as a human being. And I lived next door to Perry's dad.
Oh, goodness.
So we got to talking about how the redlining, the busing out to the outskirts of Marion County for these inner city families, and the interstates divided the neighborhoods so that they didn't even know their neighbors. They knew people on this side of the street, but not on this side. And one of our little things we came up with was that we really need to create new neighborhoods and and give people a center where they can be a community again. Even, because there's always little communities within the big, you know.
I hate to wrap this up, but they will lock the doors at 8 o'clock.
All right, can we hang
Really?
on for
So-
just one second? Is there anything that I missed that you guys would like me to bring up for next time? I know we'll be in a bigger room next time.
Yes.
It will be able to spread out.
Yeah.
So that's next Tuesday. Anything I missed? Any format? Go ahead, please.
Well, I don't think you missed it, but I think solutions are really important.
Yeah.
We have more time for those.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for